Hey guys, welcome to my channel. I hope you're all doing very well. So I just watched No Hard Feelings. Let's talk about it. So No Hard Feelings is directed by Gene Stupnitsky and it stars Jennifer Lawrence, and this is a raunchy kind of comedy, the likes of which we haven't seen, especially not in the cinemas, for a very long time. These sorts of films used to be super popular in the early 2000s with the Judd Apatow empire and anything that was, starring or produced by Seth Rogen. You all know these kinds of films that used to be super popular back in the day but have sort of fallen off in the last decade or so, especially in cinemas. We don't usually get theatrical releases like this anymore, and that's largely due to streaming. And so in light of the fact that this film, has been released in theaters in this post-pandemic world, and it does star Jennifer Lawrence and it has gotten quite a bit of advertising, I thought it'd be fun to dive into the topic at large of the death of these mid-range comedy movies that we used to see a lot of in the early 2000s. So this is going to be a mix of a review of No Hard Feelings, but also a discussion on the death of the mid-range movie, particularly comedies, as this is a great example of one. But of course, before we dive into either, as per usual, if you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe to my channel and make sure you turn on your notifications so that you can be told when I upload next. Now, without further ado, guys, let's get into No Hard Feelings. Like I said, No Hard Feelings is like one of those classic R-rated raunchy comedies slash rom-coms that we used to see in the early 2000s. And here we have Jennifer Lawrence portraying the character of Maddie, who is in her early 30s, but she is really struggling financially. And this is made worse when she loses possession of her car, which is taken away by none other than Richie himself from The Bear. Oh my god, we have a The Bear tie-in with the appearance of Ebon Moss-Bachrach, who portrays Richie on the show, and here he portrays Gary, who takes away Maddie's car. Now Gary is the first victim of Maddie's trail of broken hearts that we're introduced to in this film, because he makes it clear that he's heartbroken that she dumped him and abandoned him after their 3-month relationship, and she has the audacity to say that those 3 months felt a lot longer. And then, while she's trying to talk him up to get her car back, unfortunately her one-night stand comes stumbling out at that very moment, and he sees that she's not being sincere about actually wanting to, re-explore their relationship. So yeah, that was funny. So that was a really funny moment, and we saw it in the trailer, but it played well in the film itself. And this, of course, is the inciting incident that leads Maddie down this crazy adventure of trying to get money, or at least get access to a car so that she can, start up again as an Uber driver. And she does this by dating a 19-year-old as a 32-year-old woman. Now, I have to be honest, when it came to the premise of this film, I wasn't really interested. I saw a lot of people online talking about how comedies are back and this is cinema and all of that. They were really excited to see this classic raunchy American comedy. But for me, I didn't really have that same enthusiasm. And I think it has a lot to do with, my age and also the demographics that I'm in. But we'll talk about that more when we get into the discussion, the wider discussion. But when it comes to my thoughts on this specific premise, I just thought it was really cringeworthy, and I felt like if the genders were swapped, like if this was a 32-year-old man trying to get money by dating a 19-year-old girl, that wouldn't be quite as humorous. That wouldn't be like that. That's just creepy. It's just creepy. For the first half an hour I was watching this film, I just kept thinking, this is creepy, this is creepy, this is weird, I don't like this. And perhaps it's because I also have like younger brothers and they're roughly that age as well, so the thought of this happening to them just did not sit right with me. So yeah, I didn't love this premise. I wasn't actually interested in seeing this film, but I did want to have that wider discussion, so I went ahead. But I have to say, even though I was reluctant to see the film, film, and even though I wasn't really on board with the premise, I did end up having a decent time, okay, when all was said and done, because I do think that it's a really good comedy. There were definitely some laugh out loud moments here and there, which was great. When it comes to those early 2000s comedies, they tended to be a bit hit and miss, especially for me. Again, we'll talk about it in a second. But this one I thought was decent. Like, this one was a solid comedy that had me laughing and also members of my audience laughing. Now, they weren't like laughing out loud, go-goffing, like like they weren't dying of laughter, but there were some chuckles here and there when the jokes really hit. And also, I have to say, what helped elevate this film was Jennifer Lawrence's performance, because she fully committed to being this character. And it was great to see, because I think it's been a while since I've seen Jennifer Lawrence in something that she actually wanted to be in. Like, I just remember her in the X-Men films. Oh, that was rough, especially when we got to the later films. So it was great to see her kind of revitalized. She looked amazing. Oh my goodness, she looked stunning. And she had to, right? Because she's supposed to be the babe. But she just seemed to really dive into playing this character with all this enthusiasm. And she was really charismatic. And she did the silly stuff, the ridiculous stuff. There was also a nude scene. I don't know if that was a body double, probably, right? But still, like, she really leaned into playing this messed up, you know, disastrous 30-something woman. And I think it was really entertaining. And it helped that she had a great scene partner oftentimes in Andrew Barth Feldman, who is the 19-year-old that she's supposed to seduce as per his parents' request. I really came to like the character of Percy, who Andrew portrays. I thought he was just so sweet, and you know, I completely understood his parents' worry for his social development. I felt like their concerns were justified, but also a large part of me just wanted them to leave him alone. Like, a large part of me just kept thinking, like, okay, so he hasn't reached these specific milestones. You know, he's 19, he hasn't had a girlfriend yet, fine. He doesn't do parties and drinking, okay. That doesn't mean that you have to change the very fabric of this person. It was really annoying to me that they had this, you know, preconceived notion that every single teenager should be like this, and therefore the fact that he was different from that meant that there was something wrong with him, and they would go to such an extreme as to get him or hire him a temporary girlfriend to fix this. I thought that was absurd, and so I was really happy and even relieved when the ultimate message was to allow Percy to be who he is. And yeah, he did open up a little bit more, but he also asserted himself to his parents and told them, hey, you keep saying that I'm an adult and I should be doing certain things. Well, why don't you let me do those things independently? And I thought that was a very fair point, and I was glad to see that growth in the character. And again, all the while we're being really funny here, you know, all the while Jennifer and Andrew have great on-screen chemistry, and they have some, you know, funny moments. There are also some cringy moments, but yeah, overall we're having a great time whilst also telling this, you know, compelling story. You also got some side characters that were kind of just there. They were just sounding boards for the main characters to talk to, quite honestly. Like, there wasn't much depth there. I mean, one of the friends is pregnant and, you know, she wants to buy a house in the area, but because of the gentrification, they can't afford any of the houses there. So I guess there is a, you know, tie-in on that front. But, you know, we all know what the side characters are like in films like this. But they weren't offensively bad in any way, and the actors gave serviceable performances. And with all of that being said, I'm going to be giving No Hard Feelings a 6 out of 10. Okay, so now let's dive into the real reason why I bothered to see this film in the first place, and that is the discussion of the death of the mid-range movie, in particular comedies, because I have thoughts about other genres, but here I really want to focus on the comedies, because I did see a lot of people on Twitter. By the way, I'm still suffering the Twitter bug. I'm even wearing the colours. I'm still suffering from whatever illness that Bluebird app gave me. But anywho, I did see a bunch of people on Twitter get really excited about the release of this film because they felt like it was a return to those, you know, raunchy comedies that we used to see in the early 2000s. They tended to have a low to mid-range budget and they would perform pretty well at the box office, you know, enough to make a profit for the studio, and then even more down the line would come in the form of the ancillary market. So that used to be a really profitable model for Hollywood back in the day, but now we've seen fewer of these kinds of films even make it to the cinemas. And this has upset a lot of film lovers over the years, and I've seen this discussion pop up time and time again. Literally every 3 to 5 business days, someone is talking about the death of the mid-range movie. But I am here to offer you guys a different perspective. Hi, I'm Jean, and I don't care about the death of the mid-range comedy. No. I never really related to it much, and I feel like it's because I'm not really the prime audience for this kind of film. The style of comedy tends to be very like male gazy leaning, and it's mostly directed at basically white men. You know, oftentimes these films are directed at white American men, and so the idea that I would be upset that they're no longer taking up screen time at the cinema is like absurd. Like, I don't mind that they're no longer in cinemas, because to me they were never really my favorite genre, like I said, and so I don't miss them. I don't miss them all that much. So yeah, that's the first element to dive into when it comes to mourning the death of the mid-range comedy, is taking a look at the demographics that these films were actually directed towards primarily. I'm not saying that I never enjoyed any of these films. Okay, I used to love Horrible Bosses, the 21 Jump Street films. Like, I loved those films. They were great. They were so funny. They were some of my favorites. But I'm saying when it comes to the, you know, primary audiences that they had in mind, they weren't really audiences that looked like me. Like, let's be real. They weren't really audiences that looked like me, and I felt that was always a part of the kind of DNA of these kinds of comedies. And so whilst there were definitely comedies that I loved and were hilarious to me, there were a whole lot that I just did not get and did not have any fond memories of, because they just weren't for me to get in the first place. And also, setting aside the demographics of the target audience, you also had the fact that a lot of these comedies were kind of samey. You know, they had that kind of same vibe to them. Like, you knew what to expect when it came to a Seth Rogen comedy or a Judd Apatow comedy. Like, we kind of knew what we were getting if James Franco was in there. Do you know what I mean? Like, it was the same sort of flavor, different dish, but definitely the same seasonings have been added. And so another important factor here is taste, because if you don't like that style of comedy, you're going to struggle to enjoy a lot of these comedies, because they do have that similarity in tone and taste level. And so that was another problem that I had, you know, when it came to the proliferation of this style of comedy in the early 2000s. And so when you just combine all of these, you know, factors that led to me not really being a huge fan of the genre, like the demographic that I fall under, whether it be racially, culturally, age-wise as well, and of course gender-wise, but then you also have the taste level that didn't really suit my taste personally, and the fact that a lot of these comedies were very homogenous. Like, all of that compounds to me just not really caring and not having the same affinity towards this genre that a lot of people have. And actually, not only did I not really care about the disappearance of these, you know, early 2000s style comedies, but I actually have a lot more optimism than these fatalistic film lovers that you often see on Twitter, because I think the state of comedy is still well and truly alive, and I'll tell you why. So first of all, I would argue that comedy itself is still incredibly prevalent in theatrical releases. It's just that we don't really have films that are solely comedies anymore, be theatrically released. Instead, it tends to be, you know, blockbusters or or, you know, animated films that have a lot of comedic elements that get theatrical releases. So that way you don't just have comedy, you also tend to have like action, adventure, drama. Comedy tends to be kind of encapsulated in this, you know, whole mixture of genres, in this blockbuster package that appeals to a maximum amount of audiences across the world. Now, I do think that this comes with some issues of its own. I think a great example of this is the MCU formula that people like to talk about, where a lot of the characters do quips and the style of comedy tends to be a little bit samey sometimes. And I think that's a fair critique, especially for some of the Avengers movies, for instance. You do have that kind of flavor of MCU comedy that's, you know, prevalent in a lot of these films and TV shows. And so, yeah, I do think that the sameness is still a problem to some extent within these blockbuster franchises. But I think it's a different kind of sameness. Obviously, it's a kind that appeals to a 4-quadrant market. But still, sameness nonetheless is an issue because you don't want too much, you know, homogeneity within the genre, because then it just becomes boring. And that's ultimately what happened to the early 2000s comedies as well. And so we clearly don't want that issue to be replicated in blockbusters if it hasn't already. And not to mention, blockbusters have higher stakes because they have higher budgets. But I still see this general shift as a positive thing. It's something that I personally prefer. I would rather deal with a Marvel film that has comedic elements, like a Guardians of the Galaxy film or a Thor movie when it's done right, as opposed to this early 2000s style comedy movie. Because with the former, I at least also get action. I get, you know, these characters that I'm invested in and I've seen throughout their journey across the franchise. Like, I get a little bit more with that, as opposed to here where, you know, you have the character of Maddie and Percy in this film and they're great when you're watching them, but you don't really care about them or think about them afterwards when the movie is done. And finally, another reason why I'm a lot more optimistic about the fate of mid-range comedies than some of these fatalistic film lovers on Twitter is because we have streaming. We have streaming, guys. Yes, the age of streaming is here. It's been here, okay? And I'm here to tell you that it's okay to decide to watch a mid-range comedy movie on streaming instead of going to see it in the cinemas. I am here to give you that permission if you needed it, okay? Yes, I'm Jean, and I'm here to grant you the permission that you may have needed, that you may have wanted, okay, to stay in the comfort of your home and watch this mid-range comedy movie in any way that is most convenient to you, guilt-free. Get rid of that guilt. Don't feel guilty about it. You are allowed to do this. It is absolutely fine, because I'm telling you, I went to see No Hard Feelings in cinemas and I do not believe I had a superior time in the theatre as opposed to if I had just seen it on Netflix. In fact, I would even go as far as to say I probably would have enjoyed the film a lot more if I'd watched it at home, because there were some pretty cringy moments that I probably would have skipped through if it was on streaming. And I just prefer this. Again, it speaks to, you know, my taste level and, you know, the style of comedy that I prefer, and there were bits and pieces here and there that I was uncomfortable with, and so I would have much preferred to watch this on streaming. Like I said, I gave it a go for the purpose of this video, but I do not have this allegiance to watching this style of film at the cinema. I don't think it's theatre going worthy, in my opinion. I think it's important to remember that we as audiences and we as film lovers don't actually owe the studios ticket sales. Like, we don't actually owe them that. You know, we can elect to see what we want to in the cinemas. I mean, ultimately the customer has that power. And so I think it's fair to decide for yourself, you know, which films are theatre going worthy. And for me personally, and I will say this with full chest, you know, because I'm making this video, I think films like this, you know, the mid-range comedies of, you know, years before, are no longer theatre worthy. Sorry. But like I said, I absolutely advocate for checking them out on streaming and VOD. I do think that these films deserve to be seen. I just don't think I need to get up and go all the way to the cinema and watch this with a bunch of strangers, especially when some of these strangers are making out behind me and I can hear kissing noises. I'm sorry, but in fact, the cinema going experience here hindered my enjoyment of the film. And as my final point, which kind of ties into streaming, but also into the kind of golden age of television that we're still in, I believe, I tend to prefer these other platforms when it comes to straight up comedies. I mentioned how a lot of theatrical releases have a mixture of like comedy, action, adventure, drama, etc. But when it comes to straight up, you know, classic comedies, I like TV shows better. I like, you know, films on streaming better. And it's because they tend to be a lot more specific to my personal tastes and needs and demographic, etc. You know, like I would much rather rewatch all 6 seasons of Insecure than be forced to watch Superbad. Like I do not care about Superbad, but I love Issa Rae. Like I'm gonna go towards that direction. And so I implore you, or rather these people who are really upset about the death of the mid-range comedy, to think again about their demographic and think, you know, if these films spoke to them specifically, is it because they were part of that target audience? And also ask themselves why those of us who weren't necessarily part of that primary target audience would feel that sense of allegiance towards these films. Because again, when you think about the types of jokes that a lot of these older films tended to have, when you think about the casts and the lack of representation, okay, let's talk about it. Why would I be racing to go back to that time? Why would I be racing back to that era? I am fine right where I'm at. Literally, give me Insecure, give me Atlanta, give me The Bear, give me Abbott Elementary. I am fine right here. So yeah, all in all, I had a fun time with No Hard Feelings, just as I had a fun time with a bunch of the early 2000s mid-range comedies that we used to see a lot of in cinemas. But after my latest experience with seeing one in the cinema, I don't see myself going back to the cinema for this kind of film anytime soon. So that's it from me, guys. Now that I shared my thoughts on No Hard Feelings and the death of the mid-range comedy movie, it's time for you guys to let me know what you thought of this movie, if you've seen it, and also of the wider discussion. Let me know if you agree, disagree. I'm interested to hear your thoughts as always. Please be sure to subscribe to catch new videos coming up. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.